The explosion of sirens tore through the morning air like a symphony of chaos. Red and blue lights painted the brick facade of Lincoln High School in frantic patterns as the bomb squad's armored vehicle rumbled into the parking lot, its heavy treads crushing the fallen autumn leaves beneath. Principal Martinez stood frozen on the front steps, her coffee mug still clutched in her trembling hands, watching as armed officers in tactical gear poured from their vehicles like a dark tide. Inside the school, 17-year-old Michael Chen was carefully making his way down the hallway, his walker clicking rhythmically against the polished linoleum floor. The metal frame caught the fluorescent lights overhead, casting shifting shadows as he moved toward his first-period special education class. His backpack, adorned with patches from his favorite science fiction shows, bounced gently against his back with each deliberate step. Michael had been born with cerebral palsy, a condition that affected his muscle control and coordination, but left his brilliant mind completely untouched. At 17, he possessed an IQ that rivaled most college graduates, though his speech sometimes came slowly, and his movements required the assistance of his walker. The other students had long since grown accustomed to his presence, and most treated him with the casual kindness that comes from familiarity. The morning had started like any other. Michael's mother, Dr. Sarah Chen, had driven him to school in their modified van, helping him gather his materials and ensuring his walker was properly adjusted. She had kissed his forehead goodbye, a ritual they had maintained since elementary school, and watched as he made his way toward the building with the determined confidence of someone who had learned to navigate the world on his own terms. But somewhere in the administrative offices of Lincoln High, a phone call was being made that would shatter the peaceful routine of the morning. Karen Whitfield, a woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and lips that seemed permanently pressed into a thin line of disapproval, held her cell phone with white knuckles as she spoke in urgent, clipped tones. "Yes, I want to report a bomb threat at Lincoln High School. There's a student here who's been acting extremely suspicious. I saw him this morning with what looked like electronic components in his backpack. He was behaving erratically, talking to himself, and he seemed agitated. I'm telling you, something is very wrong here." The 911 operator's voice crackled through the phone speaker, professional and calm, despite the gravity of the reported situation. Karen provided Michael's description with disturbing accuracy, mentioning his walker, his distinctive backpack, and even his classroom location. She spoke with the practiced certainty of someone who had rehearsed these words, each syllable delivered with theatrical urgency. What the operator could not have known, what no one in the school administration could have suspected, was that Karen Whitfield had been planning this moment for weeks. As the substitute secretary filling in for the regular administrative assistant who was on maternity leave, she had observed Michael's routines, studied his schedule, and cultivated her elaborate deception with the patience of a predator. The truth was far more sinister than anyone realized. Hidden in the depths of Karen's own locker, tucked behind outdated filing boxes and forgotten office supplies, lay a small collection of items that would make any bomb squad technician's blood run cold. She had acquired them slowly, methodically, using online purchases and cash transactions that left no digital trail. The irony was not lost on her that she was about to frame an innocent teenager for crimes she herself had orchestrated. Within minutes of Karen's call, the school's emergency protocols swung into action with military precision. The first police cruiser arrived at 8:47 a.m., followed by the bomb squad at 8:52 a.m. By 9:00 a.m., the entire school was in lockdown, with teachers receiving terse instructions through the intercom system to remain in their classrooms and await further instructions. Michael was in the middle of working on a physics problem when the announcement came. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been helping him with a particularly challenging equation when Principal Martinez's voice filled the room, tight, with barely controlled panic. Attention all staff and students. We are implementing an immediate lockdown. All students and staff must remain in their current locations. Do not leave your classrooms under any circumstances. This is not a drill. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Michael looked up from his worksheet, his eyes wide with confusion and growing fear. He had experienced lockdown drills before, but this felt different. The principal's voice carried a weight that made his stomach clench with anxiety. Mrs. Rodriguez moved quickly to lock the classroom door and turn off the lights, her movements betraying the training she had received for exactly this type of scenario. The other students in the special education class sat in stunned silence, their various learning disabilities making it difficult for them to process the sudden change in routine. Mrs. Rodriguez, what's happening? Michael's voice was barely above a whisper, his speech careful and deliberate as always. I don't know, sweetheart, but we're going to stay right here and wait for the all clear. Okay. Outside the classroom, the hallways had become a battlefield of organized chaos. Police officers moved through the corridors with weapons drawn, their tactical gear creating an atmosphere of militaristic tension that the school had never experienced. The bomb squad had begun their systematic search, starting with the areas closest to Michael's reported location. In the administrative offices, Karen watched the unfolding drama with a mixture of satisfaction and nervous energy. She had volunteered to assist the police with their investigation, positioning herself as a helpful witness who could provide crucial information about the suspicious student. Her performance was worthy of an Academy Award, complete with worried expressions and helpful suggestions about where the officers might focus their search. I've been watching that boy all morning, she told Detective Reynolds, a seasoned investigator who had arrived to coordinate the response. He was acting very strange, talking to himself, and I could swear I saw wires sticking out of his backpack. I know it sounds terrible to say, but sometimes these special needs kids can be unpredictable. Detective Reynolds nodded grimly, making notes in his pad. He had dealt with school threats before, and he knew how quickly these situations could escalate. The fact that the suspect was a disabled student made the situation even more delicate, requiring a careful balance between thorough investigation and sensitivity to the young man's special needs. The evacuation began at 9:15 a.m. Students and teachers were escorted from the building in small groups, their faces pale with fear and confusion. Parents began arriving at the designated safe zone in the parking lot of the nearby community center, their panic evident as they searched for their children among the crowd of evacuees. Michael's mother, Dr. Sarah Chen, received the automated emergency call while she was in the middle of a patient consultation at the hospital where she worked as a pediatric neurologist. The recorded message was brief and terrifying. There had been a bomb threat at Lincoln High School, and all students and staff were being evacuated as a precautionary measure. Sarah's hands shook as she canceled her remaining appointments and raced across town to the school. Traffic seemed to move in slow motion as she navigated the congested streets, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Michael was vulnerable in ways that other students weren't, and she knew that his disability might make him a target for misunderstanding, or worse. Back at the school, the bomb squad had completed their initial sweep of the building and was now focusing on specific areas flagged by their investigation. They had found no evidence of explosive devices in the classrooms, hallways, or common areas. The dogs had shown no interest in any of the typical hiding spots that might be chosen by someone planning an attack. But the investigation was far from over. The next phase would involve questioning the suspect, and Detective Reynolds was already making arrangements for Michael to be interviewed in a controlled environment. The fact that the young man had special needs meant that they would need to follow specific protocols, including the presence of a guardian and possibly a special advocate. Michael was among the last group to be evacuated from the building. As he made his way slowly down the hallway with his walker, surrounded by police officers and school staff, he felt the weight of dozens of eyes watching his every move. The other students and teachers looked at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion, and he could hear whispered conversations that made his cheeks burn with shame. He had done nothing wrong, yet he felt like a criminal. The police officers flanking him were professional and courteous, but their presence felt oppressive and intimidating. His backpack, which had been confiscated for inspection, contained nothing more dangerous than textbooks, pencils, and his medication. But he could see the suspicion in people's eyes as they watched him pass. The interrogation room at the police station was sterile and cold, with harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly green. Michael sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his walker leaning against the wall nearby, while Detective Reynolds and a social worker named Ms. Patterson prepared their questions. His mother sat beside him, her face a mask of controlled fury and protective love. Dr. Chen had arrived at the school to find her son being loaded into a police vehicle, the sight sending her into a rage that she had never experienced before. She had demanded to know what was happening, why her son was being treated like a criminal, and what evidence they had against him. The answers she received were vague and unsatisfying, based entirely on the testimony of an unnamed witness who claimed to have seen Michael acting suspiciously. "Michael, we need to ask you some questions about this morning." Detective Reynolds began, his voice carefully neutral. "Did you bring anything unusual to school today? Anything that might have looked like electronic equipment or wires?" Michael's eyes widened with confusion and fear. He looked at his mother, then back at the detective, trying to process the implications of the question. His speech, always careful and deliberate, became even more labored under the stress of the situation. I brought my calculator for math class and my inhaler. I have asthma." The detective made notes, his expression unreadable. He was experienced enough to know that innocent people often appeared nervous during questioning, especially when they were dealing with disabilities that affected their communication. But he also knew that he had to take every threat seriously, regardless of the source. "Doctor," Chen leaned forward, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Detective, my son has never shown any signs of violence or aggression. He's an honor student who spends his free time reading science fiction and working on computer programming projects. The idea that he would be involved in something like this is absolutely ridiculous." The questioning continued for over an hour, with Detective Reynolds probing every aspect of Michael's morning routine. What time did he arrive at school? Did he talk to anyone? Did he go to his locker? Did he have any conflicts with other students or staff members? Michael answered each question as best he could, his voice becoming more strained with each passing minute. He had done nothing wrong, yet he felt like he was being punished for simply existing. The weight of the accusation pressed down on him like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe. Meanwhile, back at the school, the bomb squad was conducting a more thorough search of the building. They had moved beyond the initial sweep and were now examining lockers, storage areas, and other potential hiding spots. The dogs had been brought through again, their sensitive noses searching for any trace of explosive materials. It was during this second sweep that Officer Martinez, a veteran bomb technician with 15 years of experience, made a discovery that would change everything. He was working his way through the administrative offices when his partner's dog, a German shepherd named Rex, suddenly became agitated near a bank of employee lockers. The dog's behavior was unmistakable. Rex began pawing at one particular locker, his tail rigid with excitement, his nose pressed against the metal vents. Officer Martinez felt his heart rate increase as he recognized the telltale signs of a positive hit. "We've got something here," he called to his partner, his voice cutting through the relative quiet of the administrative area. "Rex is alerting on locker number 47. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Locker 47 belonged to Karen Whitfield, the same woman who had made the original 911 call reporting Michael's suspicious behavior. The irony was not lost on anyone present, but protocol demanded that they treat the discovery with the same seriousness they would apply to any potential threat. Principal Martinez was summoned to provide the master key for the employee lockers. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key into the lock, the metal clicking ominously in the silence of the administrative office. When the door swung open, the contents revealed a scene that would haunt everyone present for years to come. Inside the locker, carefully hidden behind a stack of old files and personal items, was a collection of materials that could only be described as the components of an improvised explosive device. There were lengths of wire, small electronic timers, and several containers of chemical compounds that had no business being in a school environment. The bomb squad immediately secured the area and began the delicate process of documenting and removing the materials. Each item was photographed, cataloged, and carefully placed in specialized containers designed to minimize any risk of accidental detonation. The professionalism of the team was evident in every movement, but the gravity of the situation was written on their faces. Detective Reynolds received the call while he was still questioning Michael at the police station. The news hit him like a physical blow, forcing him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about the case. The evidence was clear and undeniable. The person who had reported the threat was the same person who had been planning to carry it out. The detective's years of experience had taught him to be suspicious of witnesses who seemed too eager to help, too ready with details, too willing to point fingers. But even he had not suspected that Karen Whitfield's accusation against Michael was part of an elaborate cover-up designed to shift blame away from her own criminal activities. As the investigation shifted focus from Michael to Karen, a clearer picture began to emerge. Karen had been working as a substitute secretary for 3 weeks, during which time she had observed the school's routines and identified Michael as the perfect patsy for her scheme. His disability made him an easy target, someone who might be viewed with suspicion by authorities who didn't take the time to understand his condition. The motive for Karen's actions remained unclear, but investigators would later discover that she had been fired from her previous job at the district office for embezzling funds and had been facing criminal charges. Her plan appeared to be a desperate attempt to create chaos and confusion that might somehow benefit her legal situation. Back at the police station, Detective Reynolds faced the difficult task of explaining to Michael and his mother that they had been victims of a false accusation. The relief in Dr. Chen's eyes was palpable, but it was quickly replaced by a burning anger that seemed to fill the entire room. "You mean to tell me that my son was put through this nightmare because some woman decided to use him as a scapegoat?" Dr. Chen's voice was deadly quiet, the kind of controlled fury that experienced parents develop when their children are threatened. "Do you have any idea what this has done to him? The humiliation, the fear, the damage to his reputation?" Detective Reynolds nodded grimly, understanding the full weight of the situation. False accusations were among the most damaging crimes he encountered, leaving victims to deal with the psychological trauma long after the truth had been revealed. In Michael's case, The damage was compounded by his disability and the vulnerability it created in social situations. Michael himself seemed to be processing the news with a mixture of relief and confusion. He had never doubted his own innocence, but the weight of the accusation had been crushing. To learn that he had been deliberately targeted by someone he had never even met was almost too much to comprehend. "Why would she do that to me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never did anything to her. I don't even know who she is." The question hung in the air like a cloud of toxic gas. How do you explain to a 17-year-old boy that sometimes people do terrible things for reasons that make no logical sense? How do you help him understand that he was chosen not because of anything he had done, but because of something he couldn't control? While the police were working to untangle the web of Karen's deception, another drama was unfolding at Lincoln High School. Emma Rodriguez, a senior who edited the school newspaper, had been following the story from the beginning. She had been in the building when the lockdown was announced, and she had witnessed firsthand the fear and confusion that had swept through the student body. Emma was not content to simply wait for official statements and press releases. She had learned the fundamentals of investigative journalism from her mentor, Ms. Patricia Walsh, who taught the school's media literacy class. Emma understood that sometimes the most important stories were the ones that official sources preferred not to tell. Using her press credentials and her reputation as a serious student journalist, Emma began conducting her own investigation into the morning's events. She interviewed students and staff members, piecing together a timeline of what had happened and who had been involved. Her instincts told her that there was more to the story than what was being reported in the initial police statements. Emma's breakthrough came when she spoke with janitor Mr. Williams, who had been working in the administrative offices early that morning. He remembered seeing Karen Whitfield arrive before most of the other staff, and he had noticed her accessing the employee lockers in a way that seemed unusual. She was acting kind of nervous, Mr. Williams told Emma during their interview in the empty school cafeteria. Kept looking around like she was worried someone might see her. I thought maybe she was just getting something she'd forgotten. But now that I think about it, she was there for a long time. Emma's journalistic instincts kicked into high gear. She began researching Karen Whitfield's background, using public records and social media to build a profile of the woman who had made the accusation against Michael. What she discovered was a pattern of behavior that painted a disturbing picture of someone who had been struggling with financial and legal problems for months. The young journalist's investigation revealed that Karen had been terminated from her previous position at the district office under suspicious circumstances. There had been allegations of theft and embezzlement, though the charges had not yet been formally filed. Emma realized that the bombing threat might have been part of a larger scheme to deflect attention from Karen's other crimes. As Emma continued her investigation, she uncovered additional evidence that supported her theory. Karen had been accessing areas of the school that were not part of her normal duties, and she had been asking questions about security procedures and evacuation protocols. The pattern suggested someone who had been planning something far more elaborate than a simple false accusation. Emma's article, published in the school's online newspaper, would later be picked up by local news outlets and eventually by national media. Her careful documentation of the events and her thorough investigation of Karen's background provided a comprehensive account of how an innocent teenager had been targeted by someone who was desperately trying to cover up her own crimes. The climax of the drama came during the school board meeting 3 days after the incident. The meeting had been called to address the concerns of parents and community members who were demanding answers about how such a serious breach of security could have occurred. The auditorium was packed with angry parents, concerned citizens, and media representatives who had been drawn to the story by Emma's reporting. Michael and his mother were in attendance, sitting in the front row where they could see and be seen by everyone present. Dr. Chen had insisted on attending, despite the obvious difficulty it would create for her son. She wanted the community to see the human cost of Karen's actions, and she wanted to ensure that Michael's voice was heard in the proceedings. Karen Whitfield was also present, though not by choice. She had been arrested 2 days earlier on charges of making false reports to police, possession of explosive materials, and endangering the welfare of children. She sat in the back of the auditorium, flanked by her attorney and several family members who seemed to be struggling with the reality of what she had done. The meeting began with a statement from Principal Martinez, who provided a timeline of events and an explanation of the school's response to the crisis. She spoke with obvious emotion about the impact the incident had had on the school community, particularly on Michael and his family. What happened here 3 days ago was not just a crime against one student, Principal Martinez said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. It was an attack on the fundamental values of trust and safety that our school community depends on. We failed to protect one of our most vulnerable students, and we must all take responsibility for that failure. The principal's words were met with a mixture of applause and murmurs of agreement from the assembled crowd. Many parents had been struggling to understand how such a thing could happen in their community, and they were looking for both answers and accountability. Detective Reynolds then took the podium to provide an update on the criminal investigation. He spoke carefully, mindful of the ongoing legal proceedings, but he made it clear that the evidence against Karen was overwhelming and that she would be facing serious charges that could result in significant prison time. This investigation has revealed a deliberate and calculated attempt to frame an innocent student for crimes that were actually being planned by the accuser herself. Detective Reynolds said, "The evidence we have recovered from Ms. Whitfield's locker leaves no doubt about her intentions and her culpability in this matter." The detective's words sent a ripple of shock through the audience. Many community members were hearing the full details of the case for the first time, and the reality of what had almost happened was beginning to sink in. They realized that they had come dangerously close to witnessing a real tragedy, one that would have been orchestrated by someone who had been trusted with the safety of their children. When it came time for public comment, Dr. Chen stood up and walked to the podium with the grace and dignity that had carried her through the worst days of her life. She had prepared remarks, but when she looked out at the sea of faces before her, she decided to speak from the heart instead. 3 days ago, my son was treated like a criminal because someone decided that his disability made him an easy target. She began, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. Michael has never hurt anyone. He has never shown any signs of violence or aggression. He is a kind, gentle young man who loves science fiction and dreams of becoming a computer programmer. The auditorium fell silent as Dr. Chen continued her statement. She spoke about the impact the false accusation had had on Michael, not just in terms of the immediate trauma, but in terms of the long-term effects on his self-esteem and his trust in the community around him. "What happened to Michael could happen to any of your children," she said, her eyes scanning the faces in the audience. In a world where differences are often seen as threats, where vulnerability is mistaken for suspicion, we must all work harder to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Dr. Chen's words were met with sustained applause, but she raised her hand to quiet the crowd. She had one more thing to say, something that would resonate with everyone present long after the meeting had ended. I want to thank the student journalist who refused to accept the official story and who dug deeper to find the truth. Emma Rodriguez showed more courage and integrity than many adults in this situation. She reminded us that the truth is worth fighting for, even when it's difficult and uncomfortable. Emma, who had been sitting quietly in the middle of the auditorium, felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and pride. She had not expected to be singled out for recognition, but she understood the importance of what Dr. Chen was saying. The truth did matter, and sometimes it took courage to pursue it when others were content to accept easy answers. The meeting continued for another hour, with various community members expressing their support for Michael and their outrage at what had happened. Several people spoke about the need for better training and protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. Others talked about the importance of supporting students with disabilities and ensuring that their rights were protected. Through it all, Michael sat quietly beside his mother, occasionally nodding or smiling when someone said something particularly supportive. He was still processing the events of the past few days, but he was beginning to understand that the community was rallying around him in ways he had never expected. The resolution of the case came more swiftly than anyone had anticipated. Faced with overwhelming evidence of her guilt, Karen Whitfield accepted a plea agreement that would send her to federal prison for 8 years on charges of domestic terrorism and endangering the welfare of children. The plea also required her to pay restitution to the school district for the costs of the emergency response and to the Chen family for the emotional trauma they had suffered. The federal charges were particularly significant because they acknowledged that Karen's actions had been an act of terrorism, designed to create fear and chaos in the community. The fact that she had targeted a disabled student as her scapegoat was considered an aggravating factor that warranted the enhanced penalties. Karen's sentencing hearing was attended by many of the same people who had been at the school board meeting. Michael and his mother were there, along with Principal Martinez, Detective Reynolds, and Emma Rodriguez. The judge, a stern woman with graying hair and piercing eyes, spoke directly to Karen before imposing the sentence. You targeted an innocent child because you thought his disability would make him an easy victim, Judge Harrison said, her voice filled with disgust. You weaponized prejudice and fear to cover up your own crimes. The sentence I am imposing today reflects not just the seriousness of your actions, but the particular cruelty of your choice of victim. Karen's response was barely audible, a mumbled apology that seemed to satisfy no one in the courtroom. She was led away in handcuffs, her gray hair now disheveled and her face pale with the reality of what she had done and what it would cost her. In the months that followed, Lincoln High School implemented new security protocols and training programs designed to prevent similar incidents. The staff received additional education about recognizing and responding to false accusations, particularly those targeting students with disabilities. The school also established a new scholarship fund in Michael's name to support students with special needs who were pursuing careers in science and technology. Michael himself gradually returned to his normal routine, though the experience had changed him in ways that would take years to fully understand. He had learned that the world could be a dangerous place, but he had also learned that there were people willing to fight for the truth when it mattered most. Dr. Chen continued to advocate for students with disabilities, using her experience to educate others about the importance of protecting vulnerable populations from discrimination and false accusations. She spoke at conferences and wrote articles about the need for better training and awareness in schools and law enforcement agencies. Emma Rodriguez went on to study journalism in college, inspired by the role she had played in uncovering the truth about Karen's crimes. She specialized in investigative reporting, particularly stories involving social justice and the protection of vulnerable populations. Her work at Lincoln High School had taught her that sometimes the most important stories were the ones that others preferred to ignore. The community around Lincoln High School was forever changed by the events of that terrible morning. People who had never given much thought to the challenges faced by students with disabilities became advocates and allies. The incident had forced everyone to confront their own assumptions and biases, and many found themselves working harder to create a more inclusive and supportive environment for all students. The story of Michael Chen and Karen Whitfield became a case study in criminal justice programs and disability rights courses around the country. It demonstrated the dangers of prejudice and the importance of thorough investigation before accepting accusations at face value. It also showed how one person's courage in seeking the truth could prevent a terrible injustice from being compounded by official indifference. Years later, when Michael graduated from high school and went on to study computer science at a prestigious university, he would often reflect on the events that had nearly derailed his education and his life. He understood that he had been chosen as a victim, not because of anything he had done, but because someone had seen his disability as a weakness to be exploited. But he also understood that he had been saved not by luck or chance, but by the courage and integrity of people who refused to accept easy answers when the truth was more complicated. Emma Rodriguez had shown him that journalism could be a force for justice. Detective Reynolds had shown him that law enforcement could admit mistakes and correct them. His mother had shown him that love and determination could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The final lesson of the story was perhaps the most important one, that in a world where differences are often seen as threats, where vulnerability is mistaken for suspicion, it takes courage to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Karen Whitfield had counted on the community's prejudices to protect her from scrutiny. She had been wrong, but only because a few people had been willing to look beyond the surface and fight for the truth. Michael's walker still clicked rhythmically against the floors of whatever building he happened to be in. But now, the sound carried a different meaning. It was not the sound of limitation or vulnerability, but the sound of persistence and determination. It was the sound of someone who had faced the worst that the world could throw at him and had emerged stronger and more resilient. The story of Lincoln High School became a reminder that justice is not automatic, that truth does not always triumph, and that sometimes it takes extraordinary courage to protect the innocent from those who would exploit their vulnerabilities. But it also became a reminder that such courage exists, and that when it is called upon, it can change the world in ways both large and small. In the end, Karen Whitfield's attempt to destroy an innocent young man's life had backfired spectacularly. Instead of covering up her crimes, she had exposed herself to even greater scrutiny and punishment. Instead of dividing the community, she had united it in support of one of its most vulnerable members. Instead of proving that the disabled could be easily victimized, she had shown that they could be powerfully defended when the truth was on their side. The bomb threat that had never been real had created a real explosion of community support, investigative journalism, and criminal justice reform. The evil that Karen had intended to do had been transformed into good through the courage and determination of people who refused to accept injustice. And Michael Chen, who had been chosen as a victim because of his disability, had become a symbol of resilience and hope for everyone who had ever been underestimated or overlooked. The morning that had started with sirens and fear had ended with truth and justice. The girl with the notepad and the determination to find the real story had changed everything. And the boy with the walker and the brilliant mind had shown the world that sometimes the most vulnerable among us are also the strongest, not in spite of their differences, but because of them.